So teaching each and every day can be really, really difficult because you have new lessons and new students and new variations, and it's a lot. It's 185 days a year, 6 hours a day of standing and coming up with new ideas and new methods and new versions. So to make things a little bit easier on myself, I wanted a way to sort of cycle through ideas on a more regular basis. There's a great thing for musicians and for artists that got made a bunch of years ago. It's called Oblique Strategies. It's a card deck, and it's got a bunch of questions or ideas or activities or prompts on the cards. And the idea was, if you're in a studio recording and you sort of get stuck on something, you could take this deck out, shuffle the deck, pull a card off, and it would give you something to work off. Maybe it wasn't the end result, it wasn't going to solve the problem, but it would push you in a direction, and sometimes that's all you need, is a nudge, is an idea. So I thought I would come up with a version for teaching. We'll call it Teaching Strategies. And this is the deck that I came up with. Really, really, really easy to make. Before I show you, you can go onto the Amazon machine and order this. This is a box, and inside this box are, I think it was 500, but it might have been 250 of these. These are nice cardstock, kind of semi-gloss, rounded corner playing cards. I mean, they're smaller than a conventional playing card like you'd have in like an actual deck of cards. Like if this is a playing card, obviously, this is do it this way so you can see. You can see it's a bit narrower, right? These are more like gaming cards, like you'd have on like Trivial Pursuit or Monopoly or something like that. But they're blank, and it's a big stack of them, and that in and of itself is a fantastic tool to be able to have around. So anyway, you can get those, and then you jam them into if you're me and you're an analog sort of person for this sort of thing, you jam them into your typewriter, and then you could start typing your prompts on top of them. And you make a deck, however many you want to have in your deck. I think this deck is 43 cards deep for this sort of thing. And each one of these, they're a little bit faint, but each one of these has a statement on it. Let's see if I can get you focused here. Focus. Oh my God. Focus. Oh, you might be able to read that. And that right there, that is a prompt. And each one of these has a prompt. This one says, turn it around. This one says, offer a choice. This one says, what is the product? Break it into sections. These are all prompts that I use on this in teaching when I'm working on a lesson and I'm working on objectives to sort of push me in a direction, right? This one I liked. It says, how would 1930s radio do it? I don't know if you've ever listened to radio plays from the 30s. You totally should, by the way. But they had to do a lot with a little, and that's always an interesting thing to look at. Try another speed. Break it into sections. Ask one of my absolute favorites here. Ask the unknowable. Right? I love asking questions that have no definitive answer, because it's not about the answer, it's about the thought process to develop their own answer. So anyway, the idea with these was that if you're sitting and you're working on a lesson or a unit or a module or whatever you want to call it, you could sit down and you're stuck. You're thinking, I don't exactly know what I'm going to do with this whole thing. You could sit down with this deck, you could shuffle it just a little bit, right? And you could just pull a card out of it, and it would give you something, right? What are the assumptions, is this one. It would give you something to work off, something to question about what it was that you were doing that might let you move on with the project and get sort of a useful thing out of a stuck situation. It's hard when you're doing lots of lessons to stay creative and to stay remember to sort of question things and reassess the assumptions that you might have made. And having a set of prompts I have found useful for that, and having them made specifically for teaching, for my own teaching, I have found wildly useful. So there you are. My not oblique strategies, but my teaching strategies prompt deck for making better lessons. Maybe you should go make your own. Anyway, so it occurred to me in talking about these cards that I should mention an interesting confluence. Around the same time that I was making these, which is quite a while ago, and I had been reading about oblique strategies and all that sort of business, shortly after that, Austin Kleon, who if you're not reading, you should totally be reading, posted an Oblique Strategies deck that he had made. And in typical Austin fashion, he had sort of made it out of what he had around, which in his case was a bunch of old playing cards and the ever-present Sharpies in his life. And he literally just wrote right onto the back of the playing cards what his sayings were and what he was going to do. So if you're thinking, I really don't want to do an Amazon order for these spiffy cards, and neither did I had these around from another project, grab an old deck of beat up playing cards that don't work right anymore because the edges are all blown out like these. Get your Sharpie out and start writing on them, and you'll have a perfectly usable deck that you can shuffle and use. And the same idea is actually really useful even in a classroom. If you had a deck of these with prompts for students, or even more interestingly, with constraints for students on a given project that they were working on, you could literally, at table side, at desk side with students, shuffle through that deck and pull off the constraint that they had to work within on their particular project. And that would, that might actually provide an interesting live element to a lesson that you could use. So loads and loads and loads of uses for these. Super low-tech solutions are always really interesting, and there's nothing like a shuffled deck of cards to introduce some randomness and some intrigue into what otherwise might be a fairly staid lesson.